What do I build? Where do I build it? How much does it cost? And when can I get it? That's the checklist of ship owners' questions right now as they consider new buildings. Now, if you'd asked a ship owner what they'd be looking for even a decade ago, the answer to those questions would be pretty standard. If money was no object, they'd probably plump for the quality of Japanese yards. They'd know exactly which engine was the most efficient for their requirements, and the list of optional specs would largely be a question of cost and strategy. Things are not so simple today. As we've reported in previous editions of this podcast, the shipping industry's decarbonisation strategy is largely built on a fuel mix for which availability is low, energy density is low, capital requirements are high, prices are at record levels, consumer signals are weak, and the ownership structure of the industry is fragmented to the point that there is no clear market leader to drive the new market offerings. And yet, orders have to be placed. Regardless of the regulatory uncertainty, the lack of supply, lack of scalability or availability of technology or fuels, the fleet needs renewing. Decisions have to be taken, and inevitably the interplay between flexibility and efficiency and, yes, cost, make for a complex process that more often than not ends up looking like a series of bets rather than an actual strategy. So this week, I want to explore how the industry is thinking about these decisions. What's the best ship that you could theoretically build today? If money were no object and you could get on a plane, find yourself in a shipyard office with the available specs in front of you, what do you go for?
Yeah, I think there are two questions in that, Richard. One is, what is the best ship if money was no object? And that's where you can get into, as an owner, you can design your own ship if money is no object. And the second question is, what would you order based on what's available today?
That's Claire Wright, formerly with Shell, now head of Hanwha Ocean Europe, pointing out the fundamental flaw with my line of questioning. Inevitably, things are more complex than a glib podcast headline might suggest.
But owners are a pragmatic bunch, and therefore looking at what's available today, I think the choices are quite clear. The first step is efficiency, and I think that's always been underplayed because it seems to be just something, either you do it or you don't do it. But when we think of a future where fuels are going to be more expensive, all of the greener fuels will be more expensive. Reducing fuel consumption is a no-brainer. In terms of that, the most common choices are air lubrication, shaft generator, and rotor sails. The first two are becoming a standard choice for many ship owners. So that's what you would choose on your best ship today because their performance is proven, especially for the largest ships like the VLCCs, LNG, the kind of ships that Hanwha build. For rotor sails, it's more trade dependent. But there's also the element of what can you do with your ship to make it retrofittable? Because even if you're talking about the best choice, we don't necessarily know what the future is going to hold in terms of which fuels will mature and be available in quantities and at prices that shipping can bear. And that's where that retrofitability becomes an important part of the choice. Hanwha Power Systems, which is a sister company, does an increasing range of retrofits, efficiency-related retrofits for ships, and it is something owners are now thinking about. It's not just what do they choose in terms of the best ship to order today, but what can they choose with their existing ships to extend the operational life, not the physical life, but the economically operational life of ships. And that's an important part of the consideration of what is your best ship in an uncertain energy transition environment. So if we come back to your question of what's the best ship if money is no object, then I guess the question is just what's the best ship, or do you have enough money to create your own fueling infrastructure? Because that's a slightly different question. I think for the purposes of this, let's maybe focus on the first, just the ship. And if in that situation, you'd probably look at increasing the modularity of your ship to keep your options open so that you are able to retrofit cost effectively into the future.
That term modularity is an interesting one. I mentioned that Claire was previously at Shell, and that's significant here because they've been pursuing a new design of LNG carrier which can be upgraded as new fueling alternatives emerge, while also offering more cargo carrying capacity in the meantime. Now, modularity is surprisingly a relatively recent concept in shipbuilding that allows you to think about the ship not just as it is, but as it could be, because you're thinking about future retrofitting, you're thinking about future fuel types. It's not just a question of deck strengthening or having a bit of space or some extra tanks. You've got to think about a lot of options. Now, that adds cost, but that also adds complexity because you have to second guess your decisions that you may want to make in the future, and you can't have all the options.
I think it depends on the choices you make. So if you have an electric propulsion, then and you design in space for different fuels or for a different fuel tank or for fuel cells, for example, you're creating space not just for what you know is going to be available, but what you don't know is going to be available. And we're sitting here in 2024, and if we think about the efficiency options on the table and which are those most common ones that we've talked about, if we think in 15, 20 years' time, particularly with a tightening regulatory environment, there's likely to be technologies we haven't conceived of today. Perhaps looking at what is happening in other industries and maybe transferred to shipping. And how do you then make a ship that can be retrofitted to those new technologies, the ones we don't necessarily know? And you're right, the challenge with fuels is there's an element of, well, I need to choose dual fuel, and dual fuel is becoming an increasingly common choice in some segments, particularly dual fuel LNG. And obviously there are reasons for that we can talk about, which is primarily around availability. But the choice you have to make as an owner is, I'm going to choose conventional fuel plus a fuel I have to decide today. And therefore you're making a punt on what is that future fuel. And if we look globally, we see different impetus for different fuels. Obviously, ammonia is getting a lot of attention in Asia because of the potential industrial demand. LNG has found favour in containers over the last couple of years and increasingly recently. But you're still having to make a punt on what that future fuel will be. And the purpose of a modular design is to if it's truly modular with electric propulsion, so you can then use any fuel, it means you don't have to make that choice today. You can wait and see. And that's the difficulty that shipping has, is the choices that you make economically today that keep your options open.
Okay, let's just go back to that slightly stupid headline question of mine, which is, what is the best ship that money can buy? And yes, we know that depends on a lot of factors, and there is really no one-size-fits-all option here. But the choices that this question requires you to answer are telling in themselves, I think. Nikos Tsatsaros, Lloyd's Register's new construction director, has heard all of the questions firsthand, and he knows where the tipping points lie for ship owners deciding which type of ship they want to build for the future, where and when. So, Nikos, what's the best ship that money can buy right now, in your view?
I think you can write a book actually about that, because as you said, there's no silver bullet basically. Everything depends on what you are looking for and what you really need to do. I mean, what you want to invest, where you want to invest, and anything else. And you mentioned also quality and how quality affects everything else as well. So I will say that at the moment, what is becoming really, really hot in the industry is anything related to gas, but not just LNG, as we say, or LPG. I mean, we are now seeing ammonia carriers becoming the new kids in the block, as you like, the ones that are really, really booming. LCO2 carriers. This we will see in the future once the supply chain is defined, the value chain is defined. We will see, I think, an increased number of orders, in particular on LCO2 carriers, hydrogen carriers as well, because you're looking at different decarbonisation solutions as well at the same time. So we will see a lot of that. If you were to invest something that is not the bread and butter of Chinese, for example, Chinese shipbuilding, which is bulkers and tankers, something more innovative, then I will say VLACs, LCO2 carriers, hydrogen carriers. But again, you need to know the supply chain, how it's going to be developed as well.
The point I made about a ship owner a decade ago knowing exactly what they'd go for is, of course, a bit of an exaggeration. There's always been payoffs to consider, and standardization has never really existed as a concept in shipping, not in the same way that you see in, say, aviation. The sheer volume of choices, the array of different options and yards and considerations that you can have today is, I would say, pretty remarkable. And I wonder whether the average ship owner is really confidently making these decisions, or simply plumping for the most flexible set of options that they can get until those decisions perhaps become a little bit easier in the future, maybe. Is this all just a bit of a bet?
Everything is related on cost at the moment. Owners are, and this is a startup conversation we've been having for the last 2 or 3 years. but the prices in shipbuilding are quite high. Now, 3 years ago, it was cheaper to build a ship than what it is today. And still, there are certain owners that are saying that the prices don't make sense. There's no clear ROI for us. So we don't really want to invest on something that we don't really know what the future will look like. So yes, you will see owners ordering conventional vessels with some form of readiness to be on the safe side and being capable to have a retrofit later on down the line once the fuel solutions are clear and they know where they are starting from. But also, I think you will see the ones that are leading the industry, owners that are wishing to go ahead with solutions, even though we don't really know whether it's going to be methanol for all ship types or LNG for all ship types. Well, LNG is a transitional fuel either way, or hydrogen or whatever. The problem, that the biggest challenge for the owners is they don't know, especially for those that are in the Trump market, they don't really know what to do. And these are the conversations we've been having. They are going ahead in China, building, bulk carriers and tankers, because this is what we need at the moment. The fleet is quite aged. We had historical low records of order books in the order book of tankers for the last couple of years. We've seen the booming is coming up. It's happening. We are going to see this for the next couple of years. And then bulk carriers, of course, now we are expecting to see more on that. But, when they are in the Trump market, they don't really know what to do. That's the biggest issue we have.
So obviously from a shipyard perspective, we can build what is available today and we can incorporate levels of optionality, of readiness for different fuels. It does very much depend on the type of ship and where the owner is planning to operate. But you're right, we face the same challenge as a yard in terms of our R&D funnel, for example, in that we need to focus. We can't develop solutions for everything. In Hanwha's case, it helps the fact we build large ships. We build perhaps a narrower range of ships. We're not trying to cover every single ship type in the market. So we can focus our R&D on those larger ship types and therefore perhaps be more specific in our advice to people. But I think generally speaking, in terms of thinking about the future, there are some signposts that as an industry we have to watch. And it's very easy in shipping to just think about shipping to the exclusion of everything else. But I always say, since the transition from wind, shipping has used as a fuel that which it's carrying as a cargo. So the transition from coal to oil and now to gas. And the reason that LNG has found favour is because it has a global infrastructure of supply and demand already, which means from a shipping perspective, what we're building out is that last mile infrastructure from the storage to the ship. And I think when we think about the future, I would look at exactly that. Where is that industrial demand coming from that will drive the construction of a global storage and supply infrastructure? And I must admit, personally, I struggle with the concept that in the future shipping will have, a smorgasbord of different fuels available just from a cost perspective. In how will shipping bear the cost of that infrastructure? So in looking at future fuels, I always say, look at where the industrial demand is coming from. And if you look at the pathways for fuels, really the choice of fuels is relatively clear in the sense that there are two potential pathways. There's synthetic fuels if they mature, and that's where you would see LNG having an advantage because of the infrastructure already available, or you're looking at ammonia or hydrogen. And obviously from an ammonia point of view, in terms of industrial demand, there is increasing demand from Asia for green ammonia for co-firing with coal, which creates a demand for ships to carry that as a cargo. And you could then see, following the LNG journey, that if ammonia was to be safely used, those would be the ships that would use it first before it then is rolled out to any other ships if the safety issues can be overcome. And in the longer term, hydrogen may find favour with some industrial customers, and therefore then that creates a demand to carry it as a cargo. But it doesn't help the ship owner making choices today, and that's where really probably regulation is driving the uptake of LNG dual fuel. And if I had to advise an owner on a dual fuel kind of hedging, it would depend on where they were operating and what kind of trades they were on and where they would, in the future, think about deploying that vessel. Obviously, Europe is driving different decisions for owners who have a very large exposure to Europe than globally at the moment. But come October, I would hope we would see direction from the IMO that would give us as an industry some insight into what we need to do. And that's where the retrofitability and the choices that you make in new builds and having those options, dual fuel options and efficiency come in.
Yes, I was wondering how long it would take us to get to the LNG factor as a topic. And for those wondering whether we are going to be delving into the recent Maersk U-turn on fueling choices, we're not getting into that this week. But it will inevitably be a topic for a future edition and possibly some analysis to yet to come on Lloyd's list. Keep your eyes peeled. Obviously, fuel choice is a major factor in all this, but really what owners are looking at is the best bet to ensure that their asset is not stranded amid all of the other changes and unknowable swing factors going on around it.
They're looking for efficiency. They're looking to know that the ships they're going to order today are going to be relevant for the next 10, 15, even 20 years. That's the life cycle of a vessel, basically. So we are supporting them in developing designs with the shipyards and design companies where we can have a feasible solution that will support them on their investment. This is what is happening at the moment. When the owners are willing to invest a little bit more on that and they want to go on some kind of readiness, we try to guide them through what readiness really means and how far they can go. And then, of course, yes, there are different solutions around the world, around different designers, obviously different shipyards, and so on and so forth. So this is where we are at the moment with the owners, trying to support them in their making a sound decision.
And what about that question of innovation? We know that the industry needs more R&D, and we know that the engine manufacturers in particular have been hard at it, albeit in need of more industry partnerships and financial commitments. But what about the yards? Claire is obviously horribly biased on such topics coming from a yard, but even she admits there probably hasn't been enough innovation from yards over the years.
There is innovation happening in the yards, and obviously none of this happens independently. There's an element of, you mentioned engine makers, there is collaboration between owners, yards and engine makers in terms of new designs. So that innovation is happening. I think in terms of efficiency, then there are innovations because they're a no-brainer, whatever the future fuel. The challenge for an engine maker or for a yard in the R&D in terms of new fuels is, well, where do you prioritise? So from a yard perspective, we are working on, as you say, I would say this because obviously I'm representing a yard, we are working on new engine technologies, which is partly, for example, Hanor is working on gas turbine technology that is essentially transferring expertise or technology we have on land to then marinising it. And that's the benefit of having a multiple different companies within the same group is actually we can look at those different technologies and think, right, so which ones can we then deploy in the marine environment that then hopefully shortcut some of that development process. But obviously there's then got to be a demand for that. And we need, as a yard, to have a roadmap to deployment of those technologies. And that's where the regulatory environment really is what drives the uptake from owners rather than, because obviously there are costs involved generally in the development and deployment of new technology. And regulation is what drives our industry beyond certain segments like containers who have been probably at the forefront of choices of dual fuel because there's an element of customer pull in those markets.
From the hull design point of view, yes, they have developed a lot. I would say they have improved their hull lines and everything else. They have really done a lot of work. They've been developing their designs over the years. The innovation part of it, the technology part of it, is what is really of concern. As you mentioned, the engines in particular, we see the engines. Yes, we expect engines to come up, but when we need these engines to be constructed at scale. And we are going to see a bottleneck now because the engine manufacturers probably are struggling to develop the number of engines we need to supply the ships that we're going to build. So we are going to have a situation where we will have the ships, but the engines probably might not be readily available. From the design point of view, yes, they are developing the hull aspects. They are adding several, as we call them, environmental service ESDs, basically, so we can improve the efficiency of the assets as well.
The conclusion of all this is, of course, what you already knew. There are some tough decisions out there, but the fleet is aging, and those decisions need to be made sooner rather than later. We're going to be bringing you another bite on the related topic of where you build in a forthcoming edition of the podcast, and we're going to be looking at the yard capacity that might or might not be opening up and what that means for the market. A potential release valve or a recipe for another cyclical crash as overcapacity once again kicks in. But for this week, that is where we are going to leave it. So, my thanks to Claire and Nikos for their time and expertise. I hope you found it useful, and thank you for listening. Have a good week, everybody. Stay safe out there. Goodbye.